Hello and welcome to the School Safety Free Period. I'm Amanda Klinger.
And I'm Dr. Amy Klinger.
And we're with the Educator School Safety Network. We're a national nonprofit organization, and we provide school safety training and resources and technical assistance to K-12 schools. And then every once in a while, we're a little bit less serious and a little bit less academic. And we're a little bit more fun. Is that what we would say? We're a little bit more fun on this, our School Safety Free Period podcast. So welcome.
I like to think I'm fun all the time, not just on the podcast.
Well, there you go. But you're a little bit more fun, maybe.
Oh, more fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do you have for us today?
Well, so as you know, because you were there, last week we had the opportunity to meet with, to do a training. And there was something that really caught my attention in the discussion that we had with this one individual in particular who was a pre-service administrator. And we were talking about a variety of different things clearly in the training, but in response to our discussion about disclosures, about kids telling us what they know. And, you know, we talk a lot about obstacles to disclosures. What are the things that keep kids from telling us, et cetera, et cetera. And we were talking a little bit about tattling, you know, how we spend a lot of time in elementary school telling kids, please, you know, don't tattle. And, you know, I get why we do that. So for our own sanity as well, for a lot of other things. We've probably talked about it actually on the podcast before. But what struck me was she talked about in the conversation of what are some of the things you're going to do differently. She talked about that she wanted to think about and explore how to use sentence stems with her students in terms of giving them the vocabulary to start disclosures with so that the adults would understand that this was something different than
a
tattle.
And I think she was primarily speaking about younger, more elementary students.
Yes.
But I think it would hold true, you know.
Well, so that started me thinking about the language of school safety in the sense that we often assume that we are all talking about the same thing, when in reality, there's oftentimes very different perceptions. And so in this particular case, she talked about, she was, you know, sort of kicking around different things in terms of, again, this was in a very early elementary setting of there's something unsafe, and then being able to say that, or
I saw something unsafe.
I need to tell you about something unsafe. And so that really started me thinking about, you know, even when you think about from a middle school perspective, and I know we have worked with schools in the past, especially in a virtual environment when they have, you know, even if it's just a temporary virtual environment or the whole school is virtual, that they sort of have to create the ability for a student to give them heads up that I need to talk to you, but it's not the same as I have a question about this assignment. So how do we teach, you know, middle school kids? What do we do in our relationship building with kids for them to be able to somehow kick us under the table to go, hey, I need to talk to you. And then we go, yeah, okay, what is it? And there's 5 kids standing there. How do we how do we create an environment and I hate to use the word a code word, but something that is a language or a STEM that would prompt us as teachers or as adults to go, oh, this is something that can't wait. This is something that is not roll my eyes. Here's another dumb question. This is something different.
Well, I think you're hitting on a pretty important, a number of pretty important communication skills. I mean, think of you as an adult professionally. When you say about kicking someone under the table, like think about how difficult that can be. The social cues of like the face that I make at you, or the face that someone makes of like, no, don't bring that up. Think of how difficult that is as adults, and then now scale that back to high school, middle school, or even younger kids. And so I think, you know, to start with the notion of the sentence stems, you I think illustrate of the wanting to be able to, we want to be able to tell what's the difference between a tattle and you saw something unsafe, or you saw something and you had a concern. And that, I think, is how it starts in elementary. And then I think the next step to kind of the skill to scaffold on that is how can I signal to an adult that I want to talk to you or I need to tell you something, and there's an expenditure of social and political capital that's going to go along with that. And yeah, I think in the absence of a structure, or keywords or signals or, however you want to phrase that, in the absence of some other structure coming from the adults, I can understand how that'd be a really difficult thing for, younger students.
When I taught middle school and back in the day, when we took the horse and buggy and came to school, but back in the day, and my students, we did journals where they would write like with actual paper and a pencil, which, sounds very cute and antiquated now, like churning butter. But I, discussed that with my students that when you write in your journal, if there is a safety concern there, I'm going to act on it. So there is no expectation of confidentiality.
Of absolute confidentiality.
Right. But I also said, when you have something that you want to mention that you don't want to be part of a larger discussion about the prompt, they would write off the record, and then they would say, if they wanted to tell me something about, another teacher that said something that hurt their feelings or a this or that, whatever it might be. And so you kind of build that in your different systems within the classroom of, how do you go off the record, right? How do we talk in a way that we're not talking in front of everybody, we're just talking to them. And so I think would be an interesting thing for people to kind of reflect on. And we talk about it in response with, what we call lightning commands, or, we've heard different people call them different things, where, especially in a classroom where there's a heavy emphasis on autonomy and I'm going to give you a rationale for everything. Here's why we're doing this. Here's why we're doing that. But to be able to work with kids on the skill of being able to respond quickly without a great deal of conversation. And again, you can't ring that bell all the time. You have to, use it very sparingly. But those kind of things need to be built before you have a kid that urgently needs to tell you something, or before the roof peels off in the, in the wind shear. So I think that's really something that I think would be interesting for people to talk a little bit about, of, and there's going to be these different factors of the age of the kids, my relationship with them, the way that the classroom is structured. But I think those could also be larger faculty kind of conversations about we as a school community.
Well, you're almost talking about the development of different types of communication channels, right? So there's the discussion that we have in the whole class, right? There's the things that I'm willing to speak to or say in front of all of my peers, right? And then there's the things that I want to say in confidence. But like you said, we have to make sure that we set the expectation with students that it's not absolute confidence, that if there is a safety issue, you're a mandated reporter or, whatever else, the other kind of ramifications. But to kind of set that, I think that people do a lot of really good work in terms of like setting the community standards in their classroom. And I think this might be a good thing to add to that. Like, what are the different things that, what are the different ways that you can discuss, things with me? What are the different communication channels that we have within a classroom? Probably helpful within a whole school community. Like, what does that look like? What are the different types of communication channels? And we talk a lot about when we talk about like schools examining the climate and culture in their school and identifying who are the kids that are falling through the cracks, who are the kids that no one knows, who are the teachers, who are the faculty and staff that do a really great job of that, or that's a skill that they've really developed, or something that they're really intentional about working on. And I think the concern that I would have is that sometimes the path of least resistance is, oh, well, so-and-so, this teacher is really, really good at building relationships. So we'll just make sure that all of that happens in her classroom, as opposed to how can we make that happen more consistently for everyone? And sure, there's people that's going to be a natural strength for them, and how do we leverage that? But the concern I would have is that we don't let other people, quote unquote, off the hook of doing that emotional labor, that's something that all of us, it's a responsibility, for all of us. And I think there's probably a lot of value in having a little more structure in of saying, these are the different types of communication channels, or this is how we differentiate between tattling and telling us something that's a safety concern. And I think maybe more structure in some of those would be valuable for folks.
Well, and I think there's a last aspect. So, you're talking about, I started out talking about like the language, and you're talking about the communication structure. And then I think the third one that sort of falls in there is kind of the vocabulary. We have to, in a lot of our trainings, go and be very explicit about the difference between a vulnerability assessment and a threat assessment management. We have to be really explicit about the difference between shelter in place, as it is defined as a response procedure by FEMA, and then other districts that call shelter in place what we would call a level 1 lockdown, where you just need to, or a level 2 lockdown, where you need to stay in place. Mm-hmm. And so I think the vocabulary can also get us into a lot of trouble if I, as the administrator, believe that everyone understands what I mean when I say shelter in place, mm-hmm. or everyone understands what I mean when I say, whatever. So that common vocabulary, I think, is something that is probably worth exploring too.
Well, and I think you can't have any discussion about trying to get disclosures from students without having a discussion of the most important part of that, which is that we actually do something appropriate with the concerns that students raise, right? That it's not, that you have that tension between, you have to be confidential, right? I can't, someone says, I think so-and-so has a knife in their book bag. I can't go back to that student that told me and go, they did, and they're getting suspended, right? You have to maintain confidentiality, but you do have to be able to go back to that student and say, thank you so much for bringing the concern to our attention, whether it was there was going to be a fight, or you thought you saw a knife, or you're concerned that your friend is engaging in self-harm. Thank you for bringing the information to us. We're doing things that we're investigating, we're taking steps, we're providing supports and interventions to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. And that maybe is not satisfying for people who maybe want more specific information than that, but you still have to make sure that we go back to that person so that they understand that the expenditure of social and political capital, because it is, there's a cost to people who tell the things that they know, that those people feel like it was worth it for them.
So you don't have anything to say about vocabulary?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, I'm just saying, you went back to the language part, which I think, and the disclosure piece, absolutely. But I just think that we see it a lot in the field work when we go out, where everybody thinks you're talking about A and you mean B. And everybody goes, oh, wait, what? Are we talking about, even when we talk about level lockdown, or we talk about, to go back to your point with communications, of, what kind of an announcement, an external stakeholder, or external communication, or internal. Mm-hmm. So there are these semantic distinctions that, and they don't fall to the level of codes. Because clearly, I do feel like there's not the codes thing kind of went by the wayside. Some of the most ridiculous codes ever,
But there's a lot.
You need to explain what that is, because I just sort of threw it into here. But back in the day, there used to be
that people would, instead of saying, we're going into a level 2 lockdown because we have a non-custodial parent in the 4th grade hallway, people would say, Mary Locke, please bring your folder to the office, which was supposed to be this secret code.
One of them was, there was a procedure. The one that I remember working under was, there's a pink Cadillac in the parking lot.
Someone's a Bruce Springsteen fan. That's how we got that one. Right?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I think that shift to plain language is really valuable. I think you're concerned about making sure that we all understand what we mean when we say by that. And that's a problem writ large. That's a problem that we see in higher ed of, we all think we're talking about the same thing. And then you ask one probing question, you're like, oh, we have deeply different understandings of the thing that we're talking about. And so I think, especially, to circle back to how we started, with students. And when we say, I saw something unsafe, that doesn't mean it could only be a weapon, right? I saw something unsafe can be emotional.
Although that could be how our students may start with their definition. So it would be incumbent upon us to expand
Right.
their definition of, I saw something unsafe, or I have a concern about safety.
Right. So I saw something unsafe doesn't have to just be, I saw a knife in someone's book bag. It's, I'm concerned about my friend Nicole. It's like,
Yeah.
the way she's talking and the way she's acting. And she showed me a TikTok that was about, people, pro anorexia, pro bulimia. And I'm concerned, right? That's unsafe too. And you have to make sure that definition, that we have a common definition, but we also have to make sure that the definition is expansive enough of the things that we're concerned about. And this is something that we say all the time in the work that we do of school safety. School safety is not just active shooter response. It's all of the climate and culture concerns we have. It's all of the other things that are happening that educators are dealing with all the time. And I think that students are on the same page with me. We are concerned as the adults here. We are concerned about all of it.
Well, I think that also there's a little probably reflection for us personally when we do this in training in terms of, what you just articulated about Nicole, your example, is not the way a seventh grader would talk. Now, I can't imitate seventh graders anymore because I don't hang out with them like I used to. But I mean, we articulate it in training, and the adults in the room think about it from the perspective of, why, yes, what if that seventh grader did come to me and say, excuse me, I have a concern I would like to, and it almost sounds like an English accent all of a sudden.
What if all their seventh graders are actually Victorian children? I mean, that maybe is the case.
I'm just saying we have to, not only do we have to provide our students with the language, but we're doing that so that we can do a better job of interpreting what they're saying.
Yeah.
But also the ability to read between the lines. And if you're going to leave that up to chance, that's going to be much more difficult than, to your point, of having a conversation about safety concerns can be far beyond, I'm afraid so-and-so has a weapon. It can be, concerns about a lot of different things. And to your point, if we're only going to talk about active shooter with kids, then that's all we're ever going to get is disclosures about potential weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So while we all don't want to spend a ton of time enumerating every possible school safety hazard with our second graders, I think you can do it in a more generalized sense that gives them permission to discuss or to relate to you something that doesn't seem right. Now, let's also be real. So the first 10 minutes are going to be, I saw Tom stand up at the top of the slide, and you're supposed to go down the slide on your bottom, and that's a safety concern. And you know what? They're not wrong.
Well, what you were saying about, the language that, students use and how that might seem so different, than the sort of the examples that we give. I mean, I think I think you're right to say, like, you're still gonna have to sift through some.
Yeah. So we just don't want to create the illusion that suddenly you're going to have these very higher order thinking skill conversations with kids on this. But the issue being that you've given them an entry point or an on-ramp to a discussion that they need to have to be able to tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for elementary folks out there, I think it's really critical because while Tom stood up, or who did I say, Tom or Tim? Whoever it was, I said,
get on the slide.
Stood up at the top of the slide, you're going to get that. Somewhere in that mix is going to be my older brother's friend brought drugs to our house.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere in there is going to be things about siblings, older siblings, issues like that you're just going to, I think to your point, you're going to have to sift. You're going to have to sift through them.
And we focused a lot on communication, but I think it also connects to the discussion that we have sometimes of modeling for kids the behavior of what it looks like to be responsive to a safety concern, right? Because, I mean, ultimately what you're trying to get kids to with the communication, but even before that, is to go, if you have a feeling about like, that's not, you know what I mean? To be able to get kids to be able to trust that feeling of like, I don't like that, right? Like
Yeah.
that feels scary. That feels unsafe. Like,
And not have it be, you must be able to articulate what the problem is, instead of I can do a gut check and just tell you what my gut check says.
Right.
That's a great point.
because the kid standing at the slide when you're supposed to go down on your bottom, how does a kid, where does that start? With the feeling of like, oh, no, you're not supposed to. But that's also the same feeling of my brother's, my older brother's friend brought drugs to the house. That's it's the same feeling. Oh, that doesn't feel right. I don't, I'm concerned about Nicole and the TikTok she's showing me. It's that feeling of, oh, that's not right. And we don't have, I don't know that we do a great job of having explicit conversations with students about trusting that feeling of something's not right. And the thing I say all the time that's on blue in the face is the cultural message that kids get, especially older kids, is that when something is going wrong or something feels not right, you should whip out your phone and take a video of it, as opposed to you can remove yourself from the situation and you can tell an adult. And we have to explicitly model that and explicitly show that as a possible course of action, because they're getting a lot of messages that are not.
Well, and it's difficult when you have, let's just state the obvious. We have a lot of kids who their entire environment is this high drama, hysteria. Everything is a crisis. Everyone's yelling all the time. There's always some drama going on. And so it becomes
a lot, or they are in a lot of crisis.
That's what I'm saying. So their norm is people shouting and fighting and throwing things. And so then for us to arrogantly go, you should let us know if you feel something is unsafe. I mean, we also have to acknowledge that there's kids that are living with a high level of drama and the resulting trauma that for them to confide, it may sound very different because they may not be able to articulate it of this makes me feel bad because it's the way things always are.
Yeah.
So I think that's, and I don't have a solution for that one either. But I guess my whole point in the whole language thing is just maybe to sort of reflect on how are kids talking to us? What are they trying to say? Are we giving them the openings? And, we teach them sentence prompts, right? We give them sentence stems to write the prompt. How can we do that in a way that will, help them to divulge to us things we need to be aware of?
All right. Well, that's excellent. Do you have anything you want to add? Well, thank you so much for joining us for the School Safety Free Period. You can head to our website, www.eschoolsafety.org, for more information, other episodes, free resources, lots of other things that we have to support the work that you all are doing in education. And if you found this podcast randomly, make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all of the different options. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us on the website. Again, it's www.eschoolsafety.org. So until next time, thanks.